Hey there, good evening. Nice to see you. Welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is Bronx Night's program, and if you don't already know, where we talk to reporters and writers and editors and journalists and people who put stuff out in the Bronx so that you can find out who they are and what they do and what motivates them, et cetera, et cetera. Get a little background. And in our second segment this evening, we're going to be talking about a Bronx community that has been through a lot but still survives and still has pride. So we'll do that in our second segment. But in our first segment, let's say hello once again to our favorite Bronx reporter from the city. It is Jonathan Custodio. Nice to see you, Jonathan.
Nice to see you again.
And certainly I and many Bronxites want to thank you because you were the reporter that broke this story, that put it out in the public, that the city from the mayor's office was planning or would like to build a 34,000 seat cricket stadium temporarily in Cortlandt Park. So let's just talk about the breaking of the news, what you found out, and then we'll break down where we're at.
Yeah, so essentially, the Mayor Eric Adams' administration was had their sights set on building a 34,000 seat stadium, cricket stadium, like you said, on the Cortlandt Park parade grounds. This would be for a June 2024 international cricket tournament next year with the International Cricket Conference. It's the first Cricket Council. It's the first time that they're bringing this tournament to the U.S., and New York City wants to be one of those cities to host it. And they're floating Cortlandt Park. They still have not heard if the ICC will choose them as one of the hosts, but it's ruffled a lot of feathers. It's a park that's heavily used. People play all kinds of sports there, including cricket, baseball, soccer. People bring their families for picnics. They use the track to run, bike, whatever it is. And there are a lot of concerns that the stadium, which according to a proposal from the ICC would be temporary, we're not really sure what that would entail, what parameters would be set that the city would be mandated to take it down.
The idea in what you reported is that they wanted it for 6 months to build it and then for 2 weeks to play the tournament. I understand that it's not even the championship round, that it's just one of the playoff rounds leading to the actual World Cup match. And there were so many questions out there. You had to ferret out information. Apparently, it was not something that the mayor said out loud. It was kind of like people kind of found out about it, and they still have been rather closed mouth about it, haven't they?
Yes, it's been tough to get them to even acknowledge the plan itself. But at this point, everybody in the community knows about it. The local community board has been very vocal about it. Elected officials have been vocal about it. And some of the concerns that they've expressed is that the city would need to get state approval to alienate any portion of parkland for private use. In addition, people are very concerned that it would damage the park. And yeah, it would kind of be significant blowback to people who are already kind of who already feel betrayed by previous development there.
Previous developments, specifically the water filtration plant, right?
Yeah.
That was built in another part of the park. And there were promises still unkept. I mean, we don't have to go into that. It was supposed to be underground, and it's 3 stories overground, and they still haven't figured out 20 years later how to build the golf house. I mean, plus all the other things. It was supposed to be under $1 billion, and it ended up being 3.2 billion. We could spend all day on that. But you mentioned the alienation question. What is said by some is that, well, it's not a permanent structure, so you don't need alienation. Yet, of course, many advocates and lawyers and others have said you do need alienation. If they were to go through that process, that takes a year or 2 years. You're not going to get it ready by June 2024.
Yeah, the timeline is ambitious to say the least. The state legislature doesn't come back in session until January. Which would be right around the time that construction was set to begin. So essentially, they would need to get that across the finish line.
And do you think either the mayor was unaware of that possibility? He and the people around him, of course, thought that it wasn't going to be necessary, or they just decided they could do it and without, we're just going to ignore it. I mean, it just seems inconceivable to me that the mayor and the people around him and the people in the parks department aren't aware that if you take parkland, you're going to have to deal with the alienation in some form. I mean, you can't just sign it away like you would, an empty lot.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the mayor is thinking. I'd love to know. They haven't been public really about what their thought process is on this, but it's a tight window, and it's an example of one of the issues that people in the neighborhood and local elected officials have really had issues with, is just the lack of transparency and sort of public notice here. So
yeah.
It's very representative of those frustrations.
Yeah, there's no question about it. Then you wrote a follow-up story a little bit later that dozens of Bronx groups object to it. 29 groups signed, as you reported, signed a letter saying we don't support this. One of the big things, where are all those people going to park? I mean, look at 34,000 people. Citi Field holds 42, and look at the size of the parking facility they need. And then, you mentioned, well, okay, they're going to build it. It'll take 6 months. Then how long does it take it down? And then if they've damaged, the lawn, they said they're going to put some synthetic turf for the cricket pitches, but that doesn't answer the questions about, there's just so many questions that I don't get. Trucks coming, are they just going to roll across the parade grounds to construction material, equipment? I'm just not clear on how this is going to work.
Yeah, and these are like very serious logistics that people need to run through, and it goes back to just like there haven't been any public meetings about this, ways for people to discuss kind of their feelings or suggestions or anything like that. And the parking, Citi Field has like multiple parking lots.
Well, of course,
and it's just does not compare at all to what's available in the Van Cortlandt area. And these are some of the smaller logistics that they have to get through. Like they still need to do the alienation of parkland. They still would need to focus on the entire land review process, which takes a couple of years sometimes.
I'm going to ask you a very unfair question. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think the mayor's going to come out and say, look, we believe in this, we think it's a good idea? I mean, there have been petitions on the other side of people who have said, hey, we like this idea. We think, they talked about $150 million of financial benefit. I'm not exactly sure who's going to benefit and how they're going to benefit, but they talked about that. Do you think the mayor is just going to blow ahead and do it, or and wait to be sued? Because that the 29 groups, they're going to get together and then they're going to do what they can to stop it. Do you have a sense of what's going to happen?
It's really hard to say.
Yeah. How unfair of me.
If the mayor were to try to press forward, it's incredibly risky, because if they don't have all their legal precedents set, all their I's dotted and T's crossed, any lawsuit could slow down the project if it's successful. And if a judge puts an injunction on it, that would delay it, which is essentially just a nail in the coffin. So yeah, they have to be very careful.
So we'll see, and we'll trust that you will have your ear to the ground, and we'll tell people to look at thecity.org and read Jonathan's stuff. Listen, you also wrote something which it actually is connected in a way. The daylighting of Tibbetts Brook was approved to the tune of $130 million. And why don't you describe it? But then you wrote I thought, a very smart article about what could still derail it, or what is still needed to be done if, in fact, they open up the Tibbetts Brook to flow, down into the Harlem River.
Yeah, so Tibbetts Brook is the Tibbetts Brook project has been long in the making. Decades advocates have been working on it, and what it will entail is essentially bringing water that's underground above ground to sort of decrease the strain on the local sewer system. And this would mitigate flooding and also increase the greenery in the park. And they would also add a greenway, which think about maybe like 2 miles long. That'll go all the way to 230th Street. and this would ultimately connect with the Harlem River Greenway plan that the mayors announced earlier this year that they're trying to
Right.
put.
And advocates have been working on this for 20 years. I mean, this is a way to really solve a lot of environmental issues, specifically flooding on the Major Deegan. God forbid there be another hurricane. So what's the wrinkle with the MTA that you reported on?
Yeah, so the MTA owns a significant portion of the land between West 225th Street and West 230th Street, and that's where they have their Marble Hill Metro North station and their train yard. And so engineers would need to access the water piping and infrastructure below those railroad tracks to complete Tibbetsburg project. And according to people close to negotiations, the MTA has not really been forthcoming about having discussions so far. They themselves have said that they have needed to use it's an essential connection line with the Hudson Line, the Grand Central Terminal. There are rumors that the MTA was considering moving its waste management from Grand Central Terminal to Marble Hill Transfer Station. And the MTA did not comment on that, but those are major concerns.
There's a couple of things at work here that relate to the last conversation we just had. Number one, transparency. Nobody really knows. We're trying to find out. So that is one common denominator between the two. The other thing is, let's be clear, if they were to build that cricket stadium, it would be just yards away from where this huge environmental project is. Imagine, kind of, for want of a better word, the stupidity of doing something that is not environmentally sound yards away from something you're spending $150 million to do. I'm trying, man, but I'm not finding the logic here.
Yeah, it seems that the area has major interest for major projects, and they definitely seem to clash with each other a bit. But like you said, there isn't much transparency with either of them. But for the MTA's credit, they have said on the record that they're very interested in engaging in conversations with the city. But there seems to, at least we know a lot more with this project than we do with the cricket stadium.
Well, yes, and this one, is much further along. But it's funny, it took 20 years. So if it's going to take 20 years to do the other thing, that's not going to work out. Anyway, Jonathan, you working on anything that we should know about? I whispered it because we don't want to spill the beans.
Not ready to share quite yet, but I've done some recent stories on flooding in apartments in Wakefield.
Yes,
and Bronxlandia, an event space in the South Bronx.
Oh, right. That would listen. If we had more time, we would do it. Listen, you're the best, Jonathan. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for reporting on stuff that we didn't get anywhere else, and that's obviously vital to the people of the Bronx. And I'm sure we'll see you around town.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Great. Let's take a short break, and when we come back, the community I was talking about is the Garifuna community, and we're going to talk about where they're at, and they have a big event coming up. We'll be right back.
¿Qué color? Perfecto, mijo.
Gracias. Thank you.
What's wrong, mijo? Donating to a pet's medical care is one of the many ways you can help families in your community. Pets and people belong together. Learn more at petsandpeopletogether.org.
STEM is everywhere, like here, behind the scenes of The Walking Dead.
When we break down clothes, we tumble it with trisodium phosphate, rock salt, and dish detergent.
We stitched together images of our model and created a 3D set that could be walked through in a VR headset.
We're able to turn 12 walkers into 1,000 walker horde.
STEM can create new worlds on and off the screen. What will you make with STEM? Get inspired at shecanstem.com.
Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. Thank you to Jonathan. He just does great work. And right now we're going to visit with a couple of my friends. Everybody in the Bronx is my friend. Diego Robayo is the public relations specialist for Hispanic communities at HDC, the Historic Districts Council. Diego, always nice to see you. How are you?
Thank you so much for inviting me, Gary.
Great.
How are
Nice
you?
to have you. And then it is also Jose Francisco Ávila, who is the chairman of the board of the Garifuna Coalition USA Incorporated. We just call him Jose. Nice to see you, Jose. How are you?
All righty, Gary. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity.
Well, this is important. It's an important section of the Bronx, and we're going to celebrate it, which is really what HDC is all about. So, Diego, start with this conversation and talk to us about what HTC has recognized in the Garifuna community in the Bronx and what this celebration and upcoming event is about.
Yeah. So the Historic Districts Council is New York City's advocate for historic places. And we have a program called Six to Celebrate. And we work with 6 community partners every year, and we help them preserve and achieve their preservation goals. One of these groups for 2023 is the Garifuna Coalition, and we wanted to work with the Garifuna Coalition because there's a lot of unrecognized history about this community in the South Bronx. So we partnered with the Garifuna Coalition and Jose to identify places that are relevant for the Garifuna community. And we're going to have a walking tour on September 9th, where Jose is going to be taking us to some of these places.
Let me ask you this, because we've had this conversation about this community and other communities before. How much of this, and I don't know if you could break it down, is about the physical structure, the historic structures that are there, as well, or as opposed to the communities themselves who live in those structures and use those structures? Is this a historic thing because of the buildings and the monuments and everything that's there, or is it historic because this particular community has withstood some stuff and has emerged as an important people in the Bronx?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gary, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to work with the Garifuna Coalition. We've been trying to focus on intangible heritage. There are many communities and many cultures in New York City that have contributed to the history and the fabric of the city, but there are not that many places that are directly connected to that history. And that's one of the challenges that we had with the Garifuna Coalition, trying to identify those places. And with some research, working with Jose, we were able to pinpoint some places that are still there, but may have a different purpose, but that carry the history and the identity of the history that we want to acknowledge and highlight.
Mm-hmm. So it's really a combination of both, and what you've expressed to us is emerging in HDC's work is identifying communities as well as physical districts, right? Got it.
Right.
And that's why this Garifuna community fits right in that. Jose, let's just talk about the tour to begin with. Where are they going to walk, and what kind? Don't give us everything. We want some surprises, but where are they going to walk and what are they going to see?
Absolutely, Gary. To follow up on your question to Diego, the significance of the Happy Land Monument is the fact that that's really how New York City got to know the Garifuna community. It was when it happened. There is a particular assemblyman that I always quote who said, "When I heard there were Hondurans, I thought they looked like me." To my surprise, when I got there, not only were they Black, but they also spoke a language that I had never heard. 87 people perished. About 65 of those were Garifuna, which were the largest number of victims. Now, the tour starts right at the corner of 174th and Boston Road. And why? Because that area is really where the largest Garifuna population resides. There are 250,000 Garifunas in New York City. We say half the population lives in the South Bronx. And that corner, that area right there is significant, which is why I tell people, we talk about the fire and we talk about the location. Well, it's because that's where the community lives. And again, that was when it was discovered. So we're going to start from there. We're going to walk towards the monument. We're not going to start at the monument.
At the monument itself.
Exactly, towards the monument.
You know, I just want to be clear, because let's not make assumptions. There's some people who may not know. I guess it was 1987 that there was a fire in the Happy Land Disco.
1990.
In 1990, sorry. And in that place, 87 people perished. You mentioned 65. The large majority, that's about 3/4, were from Garifuna, the Garifuna community,
exactly.
Which is, for others who don't know, it's the Honduran community.
Correct.
What's ironic to me in what you just explained to us is this was one of the biggest tragedy, not only in the Bronx, but in New York City.
Exactly.
Ever. 87 people died in a fire. I mean, it's too horrible to think about. But you explained that this was a pivotal moment because it brought people together. It helped them identify this is us, that kind of thing. So why don't you talk about, listen, the negative is beyond comprehension,
Right.
but there has been something that has emerged with this community partially as a result of that.
Absolutely. That really, I describe it as the beginning of the modern Garifuna organizing movement, although it mobilized the community. And one of the positive outcomes of that was the proclamation of March 11 to April the 12th as Garifuna American Heritage Month. That happened during the administration of Adolfo Carrion. Today, for the past 15 years, has been actually declared in New York State by 3 different governors that have declared that. So that's the positive, and the visibility that it brought. And more importantly, again, we organized as a community and realized that we couldn't continue to keep to ourselves, but we had to basically integrate ourselves into the greater New York community. So that is the significant.
And you know what else, which I'm sure, lessons learned. I mean, you don't want to go back, but in fact, it was not a legal club, so to speak. And so then you say, well, wait a minute, we are entitled to have social clubs. We are entitled to get together. Let's do this right. I mean, can I assume that was the maturity that developed out of that absolutely horrific event?
Absolutely. It changed the safety regulations for social clubs in the entire city of New York. Many clubs were closed, and as a matter of fact, and the regulations became more stringent as a result of it. So it went beyond the Garifuna community. It went to benefit the safety of New Yorkers, especially when it comes to nightlife.
So the materials we got said participants will walk along the corridors of 174th Street and Boston Road, Southern Boulevard, Cortlandt Parkway malls, and basically important spaces where Garifunas have lived, worked, and socialized. When people are done, when they finish that, and listen, everybody's welcome. You don't have to be Honduran to say, hey, I'm going to do this, which would be fine. But everybody's welcome to learn about an important part of the Bronx. When people are done, what do you want them to feel or walk away with? And how do you view this in the context of, the complex lives we're all living?
Absolutely, Gary. When I've spoken to people recently about this fire, the response that I get is, "This is a great idea," because there are new generations who have no idea that it happened.
Yeah, and I'll interject. I explained it to my producer earlier, and he's younger than we are, and he was not aware of it, and it was.
Right?
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know that's fine. So it's to once again remind people of the significance of the community, the significance of the South Bronx, not just for the Garifuna community, but immigrant communities in general. And at the same time, again, safety precautions. This Happy Land Social Club fire was the second worst in New York history. The first was in 1911. Let's not forget, in 2019, we had another one with 17 people died. So 3 of the worst fires in New York City have happened in the Bronx. So it's a reminder, raising awareness of the importance.
That's part of it. The safety and the combination of safety and community. Diego, I assume this is music to your ears. This conversation and HTC. This is like literally what you're about. So it's not only saying, well, we're going to celebrate. Now you're going to really celebrate the history, the legacy, the neighborhoods, and all those kinds of things.
Correct. Yeah, and that's why we do a lot of educational programs, because as José mentioned, we want to educate people who are not aware of the history of New York City, or people who don't have enough sources to learn from.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to do these walking tours for them to make this subject entertaining and to let them know that there's a lot to learn and to be preserved.
And as you well know, I attended, one of the tours, I guess it was the Van Nest community that we went on at that time. About how many of these do you do a year? Do you, in other words, wasn't Arthur Avenue, Belmont was another district that was celebrated this year. Is there going to be a tour around there, or do you just don't like I just want to get the universe about how you do them, when you do them, etc.
It changes from neighborhood to neighborhood. Sometimes the groups that we're working with, they are very active and they want to do a lot of walking tours. Some other times the groups are not very active and they only want to do one walking tour during the year. Last year, for example, we were working with Parchester and they were very, very active, and we did at least 4 walking tours.
Wow.
And they were very, very well attended.
I'm sure. Yeah, one thing I can tell you from sitting in this seat and doing the other program, Bronx Talk, as well, Bronx people love this stuff, because many people, one of the things that you didn't mention, it's also people who came here since then, and because there are new people who come, there are young people who come, and it's important for all of us to be on the same page. All right, we're just about out of time. I want to make sure that we get it out there. The walking tour of the Garifuna community on Saturday the 9th from 11 a.m. to 12:30. You meet on the southeast corner of 174th Street and Boston Road. They'll end up at PS 67, the Mohegan School, which is on Crotona and 178th. Jose, have a great time. You're going to really be happy that day, right?
Can I mention something very quickly, Gary?
Yes, please do.
So attendance for attending this walking tour, it is necessary to register.
Okay.
Go to hdc.org and register there. And we do have a number of tickets, free tickets for Bronx residents.
Great.
So if any Bronx resident wants
to attend, we will have that up on the screen and to make sure that everybody knows what to do. Jose, man, I love you. You're the best.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you so much for everything you do for all of us in the Bronx. I mean, celebrating one community is like celebrating them all, as far as I'm concerned. And Diego, you're my man. Stay together and let's keep working on all these great things in the Bronx.
Thank you, Gary. Take care.
We're going to see you next week. If the curtain don't fall and the creek don't rise, we'll be back next week. Good night.